from tour players losing millions at the slots, to falling into the trap of girls who love their money more than the man holding it. These are 10 golf players who went completely broke because of one common thing. For one Monday in June 2008, Rocco Mediate was the most beloved underdog in golf. 19 holes against Tiger Woods at the US Open, 91 total holes played, a crowd that had adopted him completely, and he lost by a single stroke in sudden death. He walked off that course to a standing ovation, a national hero, the everyman who'd nearly pulled off the impossible. It was the peak of his career and, as it turned out, roughly where everything else started to come apart. The back had been a problem for decades, a career-threatening condition that had already cost him major surgery in 1999 and forced him to compensate in ways that quietly compounded the damage every time he swung a club. What only came out years later was how he'd been managing the pain on the course, drinking during competitive rounds regularly enough that he described it as a daily ritual. By the time he finally got sober in 2017, he was dealing with it publicly and calling himself what he was, a habitual alcoholic who'd been self-medicating through some of the biggest tournaments of his life. While that was building in the background, the marriage of 20 years was dissolving. The divorce dragged through the courts until 2013, 5 years of legal costs and settlements while his game was falling apart on the course. He made 18 missed cuts in a single season during that stretch, and in 2014, the bank seized his $3.2 million mansion in Naples. A house he'd bought at the height of his career, gone, sold off for $2 million less than he paid for it. Coming in next. At one point, David Duval was the best golfer on the planet, the kind of form that made even Tiger Woods look over his shoulder. Between 1997 and 1999, he won 11 tournaments in 34 starts, shot a 59 in the final round of a tournament, to win it with an eagle on the last hole, and then picked up the Open Championship at Royal Lytham in 2001. He had endorsements, a mansion outside Denver worth over $12 million, and the kind of trajectory that looked like it had no ceiling. And then, almost without warning, it just stopped. A bad back, a wrist that wouldn't cooperate, a shoulder that kept breaking down were the first signs. Then came the vertigo diagnosis in 2003, which is a genuinely cruel thing to give a professional golfer. By that point, he'd already fallen from number 1 in the world to 211th on the money list. And a long engagement had also fallen apart around the same time, sending him into a stretch where he was taking antidepressants and barely competing at all. The money that had been flowing freely during the peak years was no longer coming in at anywhere near the same rate, and the lifestyle that went with it was hard to scale back. To make it worse, the real estate crash happened. He'd been trying to sell his $12 million home for years when the market collapsed. And by 2012, he was openly telling reporters he'd taken a gigantic financial hit, had worked out a quiet resolution with his bank, and had moved his family into a rental while the whole thing got sorted out. He eventually made it back to television, found stability and peace. But the gap between what his career was supposed to be and what it became is still striking. Next up, nobody gave much thought to this 43-year-old journeyman who'd missed 9 of his first 10 cuts that season and had already submitted his application to return to qualifying school. His career, by most reasonable accounts, was winding down quietly. Then Tiger Woods showed up. It was 1996, just the 3rd tournament of Woods' professional career, and the buzz around him was already deafening. Woods held a one-shot lead going into the final round, and the narrative basically wrote itself, until it didn't. Woods made a quadruple bogey, then a 4-putt double bogey, and Ed Fiori, playing steady and unbothered, walked away with the win. For 13 years, he remained the only player to ever come from behind after 54 holes to beat Tiger Woods on the PGA Tour. The problem with a moment like that is that it can make the rest of the story feel smaller by comparison. And for Fiori, the rest of the story got considerably harder. His back had been a problem for years, a grinding, persistent issue that came with the territory of over 500 PGA Tour starts and a grip so unorthodox it put unusual strain on his entire body. He managed to squeeze out a Champions Tour win in 2004, which bought him a little more time. But 2005 brought spinal fusion surgery and effectively ended any real ability to compete. After that, he said himself, He struggled to break 80. When the paychecks from tournament golf stop coming and there's no more competitive path forward, the financial reality lands fast. A career that had produced 4 tour wins and 2 decades of hard-earned prize money simply ran out of runway, and the man who'd beaten Tiger Woods in his prime spent his final years largely out of the spotlight, remembered mostly by the people who knew exactly what that 1996 win actually meant. Up next, 5 PGA Tour wins, over $20 million in career earnings, a 1995 season so dominant he finished second on the entire money list, behind only one player on the planet. By any reasonable measure, Billy Mayfair built exactly the kind of career that should have set him up for life. Then 2006 happened, and it nearly took everything. During tournament week, Mayfair found a lump that turned out to be testicular cancer. He had surgery, finished his radiation treatments, and was back on the course within weeks, which tells you something about the kind of competitor he was. But the cancer, as serious as it was, wasn't even the most financially devastating thing happening to him that year. His 12-year marriage was also dissolving at the same time, and what followed was a prolonged, expensive divorce and custody battle that quietly drained the fortune he'd spent 2 decades building. He was dealing with his mother's stroke and heart attack on top of all of it, which is one of those brutal stretches of life where every direction you turn, something is on fire. The divorce hit him hard enough that years later, grinding through tournament after tournament on the PGA Tour Champions in his early 50s, a circuit most players join as a comfortable victory lap, Mayfair was asked about his financial situation and said simply, "I'm still struggling." For a man who'd earned over $20 million on tour alone, that's a striking thing to say out loud. It reflected what a nasty, protracted legal battle can actually do to an athlete's finances when the career income has already peaked, and the legal fees keep coming. Here we are back in 2007. At the time, this guy walked off Oakmont as the US Open champion. 2 years later, he slipped on a green jacket at Augusta. Angel Cabrera had become the best golfer Argentina had ever produced. 52 wins globally, 2 majors, 4 President's Cup appearances, and the kind of career that turns a kid from the caddy shack in Cordoba into a national icon. The money, the prestige, the legacy, all of it was real. Then, quietly, the walls started closing in. The allegations began surfacing in 2016. His ex-wife, Silva Rivadero, accused him of physical assault and verbal threats. Then a former partner, Cecilia Torres Mana, alleged he had punched her, threatened her, and tried to run her over with his car. Then another former partner, Michaela Escudero, came forward with her own abuse claims. 3 women, multiple cases, and Cabrera, rather than face the courts, kept playing golf, including trips to the United States that Argentine authorities had explicitly not authorized, which eventually triggered an Interpol red notice. He was arrested in Rio de Janeiro in January 2021, tracked down in Brazil on an international warrant, and held in the notorious Plácido de Sá Carvalho prison for 4.5 months before being extradited to Argentina to stand trial. He was convicted that July, sentenced to 2 years, and began serving it immediately inside Carcel de Bauer, a prison outside Cordoba, so notorious it's known locally as the prison from hell. A second conviction the following year added more time, and by the end, he had spent over 30 months in custody across 2 countries. The PGA Tour suspended him, of course, and the man who had earned millions on the world's biggest stages spent those years in a concrete cell. Next up, walking off the 18th green with a $750,000 runner-up check would usually signal a quiet flight home or a celebratory dinner. But John Daly had a different destination in mind: Las Vegas. Within 30 minutes, the first $600,000 was gone. He pulled another $600,000 line of credit from the casino and burned through that in 2 hours. By the time he finally stopped, he dropped $1.65 million in 5 hours on slot machines. 5 hours, one sitting, after already losing the tournament. And the truly wild part? His immediate reaction wasn't panic. His logic, and he actually admitted this, was that his sponsorship payments were coming in January, so he'd just pay it all back and everything would be fine. "No problema," he wrote. Then, immediately after, "Hell yes, there's a problema." That's John Daly, one of the most naturally gifted golfers to ever play the game. A guy who showed up to the 1991 PGA Championship as a complete unknown, the 9th alternate, barely squeezed onto the field, and then absolutely dismantled the competition. 2 majors, massive endorsements, a personality so large it had its own gravitational pull. The money was real, and there was a lot of it. But so was the casino habit. Between 1991 and 2007, Daly lost somewhere between $55 and $57 million gambling. He didn't even know the exact number until he went back through his tax records while writing his autobiography. And even he was shocked. He thought it might have been $20 or $25 million. It was more than double that. 7 simultaneous hands of blackjack, $5,000 slot machines, casinos extending him lines of credit because he was John Daly. And John Daly always came back. 4 divorces, IRS problems, decades of sponsorship money funneled directly into the house. His one-word explanation for all of it? Stupidity. At least he owned it. Next up, he won the 1991 Open Championship at Royal Birkdale with rounds of 64 and 66 on the weekend, one of the cleanest closings in major championship history. He kissed his wife, held the claret jug, and cried. The whole world was in front of him. What nobody could have predicted was that it was essentially the last great thing he ever did on a golf course. The decline crept in slowly, starting around 1993. A bad shot here, a missed cut there, an inexplicable hook that kept appearing off the tee when the cameras were on. From 1994 to 1997, he missed 32 consecutive cuts on the PGA Tour. He tried everything to stop it. Over 30 coaches, psychologists, hypnotists, nutritionists, swing gurus, spiritual healers, running through his own money trying to diagnose something that resisted every cure. In a 4-year stretch, he earned less than $20,000 worldwide in competitive golf. A major champion, making less than a club pro. The breaking point came at Royal Troon in 1997, when he showed up for the British Open underprepared with a bad back, talked into playing by friends the night before. He'd already sent his caddy home, so he took a tennis player he knew to carry the bag. He shot 92, 21 over par, the worst score by a past champion in modern memory. He signed his card, walked into the locker room, and cried. He quit the tournament right then, flew back to Australia, and never played at that level again. He later admitted that shooting a 92 left him with so much mental baggage that the fear of doing it again became impossible to overcome. Looking back, he felt that if he had just skipped that week entirely, he might have actually saved his career. Up next. In the 1980s, Ken Green was exactly the kind of golfer the PGA Tour needed more of and desperately wanted to control. 5 wins, a Ryder Cup appearance, and a personality so combustible it generated its own weather system. He cracked open a beer on the 15th hole while playing with Arnold Palmer at the Masters, then convinced the tour to drop the fine by claiming it was non-alcoholic. It wasn't. He smuggled friends inside Augusta National in the trunk of his courtesy car, ran such an elaborate operation that security literally created the Ken Green rule to stop him. Over 24 fines total for everything from swearing and flinging clubs to signing autographs mid-round. The problem was that underneath all of it, things were quietly coming apart. A costly, drawn-out divorce from his second wife started what he later described as an avalanche. Drinking more than socially, gambling, sinking into clinical depression, missing cuts, watching his finances drain away. By 2003, he was $300,000 in debt with IRS obligations piling on top, telling Golf Digest he wasn't sure the government had any chance of seeing their money unless he played his way out of it. In his 40s, he lost his tour card entirely and had to grind through the nationwide tour just to stay relevant. Then, June 2009 arrived and made everything that came before feel almost small. A tire blew on his RV on a Mississippi interstate. The vehicle went down an embankment and into a tree. His brother Billy, his girlfriend Jean, and his dog Nip were all killed. Green survived, barely, and had his lower right leg amputated. Less than 7 months later, his 21-year-old son Hunter died of a drug overdose in his dorm room in Dallas. A rough life, and he still plays golf on a prosthetic leg, mostly for himself now. Coming in next. By the early 2000s, Jim Thorpe had everything his talent deserved. He'd won 3 times on the PGA Tour in the 80s and dominated the senior circuit with 13 wins, including a major. With 100 top 10 finishes, he was one of the highest earners in the history of the senior tour. He lived in a fancy gated community in Florida, drove a Mercedes, and spent his time helping his church and mentoring kids. It was a long way from his roots as the son of a golf course worker in North Carolina, and, by all accounts, he had truly made it. But behind the scenes, he simply stopped paying his federal income taxes. From 2002 to 2004, he earned over $5 million, but didn't send a dime to the IRS. He had already been flagged in a previous investigation and let off with a warning, but he didn't change his habits. When the government finally charged him in 2009, they found he owed over $2 million. To make matters worse, he had won $1.7 million from gambling and put it all back into more bets instead of paying his debt. He pleaded guilty and tried to avoid prison, but the judge didn't buy it. They pointed out that while he ignored his taxes, he was still donating $250,000 to his church and paying for a luxury car and expensive personal bills. After telling him he was a poor example for others, she sentenced him to a year in federal prison and ordered him to pay back everything plus interest. The tour suspended him the moment the news broke. He went to prison in April 2010 and was released the following January, returning to the Champions Tour just 3 months later because it was the only way he could afford to pay his massive bill. Next up, it's not uncommon for golfers to blame their putting or something else when things go south. But Sergio Garcia blamed love. In 2008, Garcia was ranked second in the world after winning the Players' Championship. He was dating Morgan Lee Norman, Greg Norman's daughter, and everything looked perfect. Then March 2009 hit, and the relationship ended. What followed wasn't just a bad month. Garcia admitted the breakup briefly dulled his enthusiasm for golf and killed his desire to practice. Brief? He tanked to 77th place in his next event, then 38th at the Masters, then missed the cut at Quail Hollow. It hurt. It was probably the first time I have been really in love, he told reporters. His game vanished. Garcia's world ranking plummeted from second all the way down to 78th. At the Players' Championship, where he was the defending champion, he could only manage 22nd place. The worst part? Garcia missed the 2010 Ryder Cup, the first time in his career he hadn't made the team. For a guy who lived for representing Europe, that absence said everything. He broke down in tears during the Madrid Masters and eventually just stopped playing for a while. After winning the Players' Championship while dating Norman, Garcia didn't win again for more than 2 years. From 2009 through 2011, he was stuck in an undeniable slump. He eventually crawled back, married Angela Akins, won the Masters in 2017, became a legend. But 3 years of his prime? Gone because he couldn't figure out how. Which brings us to, before the incident, Robert Allenby had built one of the more quietly impressive careers in Australian golf. $27 million in career earnings, 4 PGA Tour wins, 5 President's Cup appearances, and a worldwide resume of 21 victories. He was not a household name in the Tiger Phil era, but he was a consistent, respected professional who'd been competing at the highest level for 2 decades. Then, one Friday night in Hawaii in January 2015, everything unraveled in a way that no one fully understood, including, apparently, him. He'd missed the cut at the Sony Open and went drinking at a wine bar in Waikiki with his caddy and a friend. Somewhere between paying the tab at 10:48 p.m. and the following morning, Allenby woke up in a park, face bloodied, wallet gone, phone gone, credit cards gone. His immediate explanation to the media was dramatic. He'd been drugged, kidnapped, thrown in a car trunk, beaten, and dumped miles from the bar. The problem was that the story started falling apart almost immediately. The homeless woman who found him denied the kidnapping version. Police said there was no evidence of an abduction. His own caddy, months later, suggested he'd simply fallen and hit his head, which predictably ended that working relationship mid-round at the Canadian Open when the caddy walked off the course after a club selection argument and a school teacher from the gallery finished carrying the bag. Allenby shot 81 and withdrew. The reputation he'd spent 20 years building got buried under a Google search that returned his bloodied selfie before it ever reached his tournament wins. He'd also sold a nearly $2 million home when his 13-year marriage ended in 2012 and took a massive financial hit. Years later, he acknowledged the incident in print still defines him to strangers. That's a brutal thing to carry, and an expensive one. Next up, They say love is priceless. Greg Norman proved it, especially when it costs $103 million. This man married flight attendant Laura Andraschi in 1981, back when he was climbing his way to becoming the world's #1 golfer. They built an empire together. Norman amassed what was estimated as a $500 million fortune from golf earnings, sponsorships, wine, real estate, and golf design businesses. Everything looked perfect from the outside, until 2006 came. That year, Norman, while still married, met tennis legend Chris Evert, and both left their spouses to be together. The divorce got ugly fast. Norman's lawyers dismissed Andraschi's contributions to his success, which didn't exactly help things. When the dust settled in 2007, the divorce cost Norman $103 million. Andraschi received a $50 million lump sum payment, plus another $30.2 million to be paid over 15 years. Add in $17.5 million from their beachfront Jupiter Island mansion, a $4 million Palm Beach home, and $500,000 in jewelry, and you've got one expensive divorce. When asked about the $100 million settlement, Norman called it the price you pay for freedom. Freedom that lasted exactly 15 months. His marriage to Evert fell apart after just over a year. It happened in the worst time possible. Norman was moving from his playing career into business, and suddenly he was losing over $100 million. That kind of financial blow would have sunk most people, but Norman bounced back, rebuilding his business empire and eventually becoming the face of LIV Golf. Still, $103 million for leaving your wife for a tennis star who dumps you 15 months later. That's a $250 million mistake when you factor in legal fees and everything else. Next up, he was standing on the second tee at Royal Lytham with a birdie already on his card, tied for the lead at the 2001 Open Championship, and everything felt like it was finally coming back together. Then his caddy walked over and said 4 words that changed the whole day. "You're going to go ballistic." There were 15 clubs in the bag, one over the legal limit. Woosnam threw the club into the weeds, turned a shade of red that the gallery would later describe as alarming, and said he felt like he'd been kicked in the teeth. And honestly, he had been. Strip away those 2 strokes and he finishes second, worth roughly £220,000 more than what he actually took home. It also cost him a Ryder Cup qualification spot. He was sitting 12th in the standings when 10th was the cutoff. Second place would have put him comfortably inside. Instead, he watched from home. See, prize money during Woosnam's peak years in the late 80s and early 90s was a fraction of what tours offer today. So every major winning opportunity carried enormous financial weight beyond the check itself. He'd already learned that lesson the hard way. A back condition had been quietly shortening his competitive window since a diagnosis in 1986, when a specialist told him he might have 10 good years left. That clock was always running, which meant every missed opportunity was a chunk of the financial future he was still building. He was so self-aware that, while other pros were blowing through their earnings, Ian Woosnam moved to Jersey for tax efficiency and invested heavily in a portfolio that eventually paid out millions a year. He knew exactly what he was doing, choosing long-term stability in Barbados and the Channel Islands over the flashy spending habits of his peers. Next up, you spend your entire life building something. 9 major championships. A career grand slam. One of only 5 players in history to achieve it. You're Gary Player, the Black Knight, a legend who defined an era of golf, and then the people who should protect your legacy start selling it off piece by piece. For nearly 2 decades, Gary Player trusted his son Mark to manage his business affairs. Father and son working together, protecting the brand they'd built. Except somewhere along the way, the lines got blurred. In 2020, at 84 years old, Player had to take his own son to court and won a $5 million judgment for unpaid royalties from 2014 through 2018. But the damage was just beginning. In 2021, Player's 1974 Masters trophy, one of 3 green jackets he'd earned, sold at auction for $523,883. Not because Player wanted to sell it, because his son Mark put it up for auction without his permission. His South African Open trophy went for $48,841. The irons he used to win his only U.S. Open in 1965 fetched $17,947. And even the shoes from his final Masters appearance sold for over $1,000. Player sued Mark, of course, but he also had to file a second lawsuit against his grandson Damien. who allegedly solicited buyers for memorabilia stored in 19 lockers and sold multiple Rolex watches for significant sums. His story is unique in this list because he didn't go broke because of women or a wild lifestyle. He lost a fortune because the people closest to him, his own family, decided his legacy was worth more in cash than in honor. Next up, by June 2003, Mike Weir had earned over $4 million that season alone, making him the #1 golfer on the PGA Tour in terms of earnings. He'd just won the Masters, the first Canadian ever to do it. He'd been married to Bricia Rodriguez since 1994, raising 2 daughters together. Everything looked perfect from the outside, but inside a storm was brewing. Neck, elbow, and lower back problems hampered his swing starting in 2010. His game collapsed. By the 2015-2016 season, he'd missed the cut in 14 of 18 events and withdrawn from 3 others. That's bad, but the worst wasn't on the course. In 2015, Weir split with Bricia after 21 years of marriage, taking custody of his 2 teenage daughters. That July, he withdrew from the Canadian Open, what would have been his 25th appearance, and took an indefinite leave from golf, calling it an extremely difficult decision. The guy who once earned $5 million in a single season found himself stepping away from the game entirely. Not because he went broke, his net worth remained around $25 million, but because when your marriage falls apart after 2 decades and you've got 2 teenage daughters depending on you, suddenly golf doesn't matter as much anymore. Weir eventually came back, joining the Champions Tour at 50. But those years between his divorce and comeback? Gone. Lost to a personal crisis that money couldn't fix and a game that couldn't wait. Coming in next. Every country club has that one week where nobody talks about golf. Not the new greens, not the member guest tournament. Nope. Suddenly everyone's whispering over mimosas. Carts are stopping mid-fairway and the pro shop is selling more gossip than polos. And in 2018, oh man, where the rumor mill caught fire. In September that year, the mother of Dustin Johnson's 2 children deletes every photo of him from Instagram. Within hours, the golf world erupts. California socialite Yasi Safai becomes the name at the center of the scandal, with reports claiming she and Johnson struck up a relationship at Sherwood Country Club that enraged his fiancée, Paulina Gretzky. An anonymous club member told media it was the talk of the country club and had caused the Gretzky family enormous heartache. Paulina had been engaged to him since 2013 and suddenly looked like she was done. But this wasn't Johnson's first rodeo with scandal. Back in 2014, Johnson took a leave of absence from golf, with reports surfacing that he'd been involved with at least one wife of a PGA Tour player. Even golf journalist Robert Lucetich tweeted that Johnson had affairs with 2 wives of peers, claiming one broke up the marriage. One name that came up was Allie McKenzie, ex-wife of PGA Tour pro Will McKenzie. She even had to go out and said that she and Will were already separated. Meanwhile, Safai denied everything too, stating she'd only run into Johnson maybe 4 times at the club and barely knew him. And a source close to the Gretzky family denied they'd split. Nothing was ever proven. But after that, Johnson became the guy whose personal life overshadowed his golf career. That's one of the things the internet does perfectly.